Hi everyone. As part of this problem, we have the input table as transactions. This table has below columns ID, that is the transaction ID, country, that is the country in which this transaction took place, state, what is the status of this transaction, whether it was approved or whether it was declined, amount, that is what is the total transaction amount, trans date, that is the date on which this transaction took place. So every entry gives information about a particular transaction. Now we need to get the output in the below format. So basically, based on the transaction date, we have to get only the year and the month part. And for every year and a month, for every country, we have to do a aggregation. That is, for example, in year 2028 December, we need to identify in which country that transaction took place, how many transactions took place in that country. So for example, in December 2018 in the US, so if we see 2018, there were two transactions that took place in December 2018. After that, we have to identify what is the total number of approved transactions. So as we see here in these two entries, there is only one approved transaction. Next is trans total amount, which is the total transaction amount. So it is 1000 plus 2000, that is 3000. And the last column that we need to derive is approved total amount. What was the amount that got approved? So it is 1000. So for a particular country in a particular year and a month, we need to identify all these details, the total transaction counts, the total approved counts, the total transaction amount, and total approved amounts. So this is what we need to get. So we will go ahead and solve this problem. So to start with, we will start working on this input table, that is transactions. Now, as we can see, we need to get the year and month part from transdate. So for that, what we will use is format function. In this function, we will pass the first parameter as the transaction date column. And in the second parameter, we need to pass the format in which we need this date to be converted to. So we want it to be converted to year-month. So let's call this as month column. And let's have the second column as country. And for now, let's have the trans date column as well to see the data. So let's run and see the output. So as we can see, for every transaction date, we have got it converted into year and month part. Okay, so this is what we have. Now let's get going and derive the other columns. So in the required output, we have derived two columns, that is month and country. The rest columns we need to derive. So the next column is trans count. So if we see the input table, so the trans count is if we can find out for that particular year and month, what are the total entries that are present. So that will be our total transaction count. So we can do a grouping here. Since we need to identify the count, we will do the grouping based on this country and month. So country and this year month part. So on these two columns, we will do the aggregation and we will take the total count that is present and call this as trans count. So let's run and see the output. So as we can see, for every year month for a particular country, we have determined the total transactions that took place. That is the first part. And also it is required here that we sort based on the country in descending order. That is, we order it based on the country in descending, followed by this month column that we have derived. So let's quickly run and see the output. So now if we see, we are matching with the expected output for the three columns. So let's proceed ahead. We have determined the total transaction count. As the next column that needs to be derived, it is approved count. So approved count is out of this total transactions, how many transactions were approved for that country in that particular year month. So to do that, what we can do is we can use the sum function and in this we can have a case condition. So in this case, we can check if the state is approved. Then keep it as 1, else keep it as 0. This will be our approved count. So let's run and see the output. So we have got the approved count as well. We have used the sum function. If required, we could have also used the count function here. But there is a catch here. If we use the count as it is, it won't give the right results. Let's run this and see first. So if we see here, the count is giving the total transaction count and not the approved count. And why is that? Because in both the cases, we have given other than null. Okay, so in the else part, if we can add it as null, then it will count only those entries where 1 is present. That is only for those records where the state is approved. It will have 1 populated and only those will be counted. For other records where it is other than approved, it will populate null and not count those records. So this way count will work correctly. So always ensure that whenever we are using count, in the else part we have null, or remove the else part altogether so that by default it will have null populated. So let's run and see the output. So now if we see, we are able to derive the approved count as well. So if we remove the else part as well, it will give the same behavior, because by default, if we don't give the else clause, null is considered. So let's run this. So as we see, there is no difference. So now we need to move on to the next column that we need to derive, that is the total transaction amount. So for this, we will do a simple sum based on the amount column. Since we have already done the grouping, we simply need to sum the total amount to get the total transaction amount. So this is our next column that we have derived. Let's run. So as we can see, we have identified what is the total transaction amount simply by using the sum function on the amount column. So this is coming correctly. The only item that is pending is deriving the last column, that is approved total amount. So this was the total amount for all the entries. Now we need to consider only the approved amount records. So here it should be 1000. So that is what we want here. So again, to derive this column, what we will do is we will use the sum function again. And in the sum function, we will add the case condition. Why we are adding case condition? Because we want to consider only those records where the state is approved. Only in that case, we need to consider the amount. Otherwise, we don't want to consider any amount. So if required, we can add a else clause with 0, or we can leave it as it is. In that case, null will be considered. Okay, so this will be the approved. Let's add else 0 to avoid any nulls being presented. Okay, so and give this column name as approved total amount. So now let's run and see the output. So as we can see, if we compare it with the expected output, we have got it exactly in the same manner. We have converted the transaction date into the year and month part. We have derived the country, and these are all the counts and amounts that we have obtained. That is the total transaction count, total approved count, total transaction amount, and total approved transaction amount. So these columns we have correctly derived. So let's go ahead and summarize as to how we have reached to the solution. Okay, so we started working on this input table, that is transaction. As a first step, we have converted the transaction date into year and month part because we want to do the aggregation in this format. That's why we have got it converted to this format. Along with that, we have the country column. On these two columns, we have done the grouping. After that, on this column, after doing the grouping, we have obtained the count so that the number of entries that will be present, it will represent the total transactions that took place for this country for this year and month. So we can simply use this count function. Next thing was determining the total approved counts. or the total approved transactions. So that we have determined using the count function. Here we have checked if the status is approved, then we have kept it as 1. Otherwise, it will be populated as null. So only those entries where the state is approved, that will be considered for the count function. We could also have used the sum function here to get the approved count. The next thing was determining the total amount, total transaction amount. For that, we have used the simple sum function on the amount column and obtained the total transaction amount. Ultimately, to derive the last column, that is approved total amount, we have checked if the state is approved for the record, then we have considered the amount, else we have set it to 0. So this way we have derived the last column as well, and we have ordered it based on the country in descending order followed by month. So this way we have solved the problem. So we will add the create table and insert statement in the description. Please utilize it for your practice. If you found the video useful, please like it.
comment,
If you have
and
not yet subscribed the
subscribe.
channel, please subscribe and please provide your feedback in the comments. Thank you.